Welcome to another episode of Mokena's Front Porch, a Mokena history podcast with Matt Galick and me, Israel Smith. This episode, Matt and I did something a little different, and we went and sat in Zap Taco and recorded this episode there on site. So that's why you might get a little music in the background, a little noise in the background, but hopefully it's not too distracting for you. But we thought it would be kind of a neat way to do this episode is actually sit in the building that we're talking about. So we also talked with Gino Picciola, who's the owner of the building, and got some insight about what the process he went through was to remodel the building, and also a little sneak peek on what he's doing on another Front Street property that he owns and is developing. So enjoy this episode. It's a great article, again, written by Matt about a property that has played such a significant role in our town over the years. So enjoy this episode about Hatch Hall, which is now known as Zap Taco. All right, we are, for the first time, we're doing an on-site recording, and We're here sitting in Zap Taco, the Zap Taco House, with Gino Picciola, who, Gino, tell us your relationship to this building.
I purchased the building and did the full remodel, and that's about it. Now I'm the landlord.
Yeah, and to Zap Taco, Jason
and Todd.
And Todd of Zap Taco, who we're also going to talk to Jason, but he wasn't able to be here with us tonight and get a little idea about what they're doing with the restaurant here. And then, Gino, we'll talk to you a little bit more after the story, as well as kind of keep you around while we're talking.
Yeah, definitely.
Anything you have to input, help yourself.
Sounds
so.
Good.
This is the story, Matt's blog post from September 11th, 2020, and it was titled "Hatch Hall, a True Mokena Landmark."
Yes, indeed, that's the one.
So, Matt, maybe you want to give us a little color before we get into the story, or anything to highlight.
Yeah, well, Hatch Hall, first of all, I'm already getting ahead of myself. I always just refer to this building as Hatch Hall because that's what it was for so many decades. This building was the focal point of so much social activity in Mokena for a very, very long time. And it also has some really interesting associations with some pretty unique characters in the history of Mokena. So I'm so happy to see it flourishing now.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's waiting to make even more history and more memories here. So.
Well, good. Well, we're going to, like I said, after we hear the story, we're going to talk to Gino about the process he went through in remodeling this property and keeping it around for another long number of years, hopefully.
Yeah,
so,
I hope so. Definitely.
With that, let's get into the story.
Sounds good. A new dawn in the business life of Mokena has begun with the arrival of Zap Tacos, which has set up shop for hungry customers at 19711 Mokena Street. This address has been home to many local concerns over the years, most recently the well-known insurance agency of the late Cadet Cottingham. Turning back the pages of time, we find that there's no small amount of history attached to this old landmark. And when a new chapter starts, it's best to look at the beginning of the book. In order to really understand this place, one first has to know the man whose name will forever be connected to this property and whose life is more tied to it than anyone else's in the record of years. John Alexander Hatch was born February 27, 1842, in what would later be Frankfort Township, to rugged pioneer parents of English and Scottish birth. His earliest years were lived in the prairie wilderness, a world where neither Frankfort nor Mokena existed yet. After spending his formative years here, as a young man, John Hatch made his way to Tinley Park, then still known as New Bremen, where he found work with the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad. With the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, he rallied to the flag and joined the 72nd Illinois Volunteer Infantry at Chicago's Camp Douglas in August 1862. Private Hatch became a veteran of the storied Vicksburg campaign, among other clashes, and at one point even saw duty on the home front as a recruiter. Just after the start of the war's last year, he was transferred to the 47th United States Colored Infantry, a unit made up of former slaves. In this new regiment, Hatch was awarded the rank of lieutenant, no small testimony to his skill at soldiering. While John Hatch came out of the war's veritable storm of shot and shell physically unscathed, he suffered a unique injury during his service that stayed with him for the rest of his days. While with the colored infantry in the Gulf states, the region's blinding sun caused irreversible damage to his vision.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Vicksburg campaign?
Sure, absolutely. So the Vicksburg campaign was quite a big deal in the history of the Civil War. It was a campaign to capture the fortified town of Vicksburg, Mississippi, which is on the Mississippi River. And the capture of that town would have given the Union forces complete control over the Mississippi River. So it was a pretty big deal in terms of things as far as the war was going. I can't really call it a city. The town finally fell on July 4th, 1863, which was just one day after the Union victory at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Also was kind of like a proving ground for General and future President Ulysses S. Grant. So, pretty big deal, pretty significant in the history of the Civil War. Also had thousands and thousands of men from Illinois at the battle, at the siege. In fact, to this day, there is a huge monument to the Illinois men on the battlefield. So lots of local connections to Vicksburg.
Well, and I thought it was neat. Another Mokena resident that took up arms when the Civil War was starting. And
Absolutely.
You talked about the vision loss that he suffered. So what did that mean? Like, how did that affect him through his life?
It's, unfortunately, there aren't too terribly many details about what this looked like for him day to day for John Hatch. Although, I kind of suspect it's what might have led him into becoming a storekeeper instead of a farmer. Because he came from a farming family, and in the immediate years after the Civil War, he still tried his hand at farming, but eventually, as we'll talk about, he found work in a store in Mokena and then branched out on his own. So I kind of think that it might have affected him, it might have affected his ability to do actual labor. And as the years went on, he did receive a pretty decent pension from the federal government on the basis of this disability.
Okay, but it wasn't like he wasn't totally blinded. He was just dealt with it at some level,
right?
And was able to go on.
He wasn't totally blinded. Nowadays, he probably would have gotten by with a pretty strong prescription in his classes. But everything that I've been able to research into, because the file that was generated in his pension application still exists in the National Archives. So there's quite a lot of detail in there about how the vision damage affected him and stuff like this, and his efforts in getting the pension and stuff like that. So to go back to your question, no, he was not completely blind, but it was enough of a hindrance to his day-to-day life where he ultimately got some compensation for it. Home from the battlefield, he married local belle Nancy McGovney in Mokena on May 10th, 1866. This union was ultimately blessed with 9 children, all of which but one survived to adulthood. The first years of John and Nancy Hatch's marriage held many travels for them. Soon after they tied the knot, the Hatches moved to the neighborhood of New Bremen, where John tried his hand at farming for 3 years. This was followed by a brief residence in Chicago, whereupon they went back to New Bremen for a spell. In 1869, the young family moved to Missouri with John's parents, and finally came back to Mokena for good in 1876 after an absence of 7 years. With the replanting of their roots in our neck of the woods, Hatch took a job at the general store of McGovney & Son, kept by his father and brother-in-law. Upon Mokena's incorporation in 1880, he was elected clerk of the newly minted village, and thus was the first to ever hold this position. The earliest written records of administrative doings in town are in his hand. John Hatch was the wearer of many hats in our community over the years, including postmaster, justice of the peace, and school director. Bit by bit, Mr. Hatch became more established in the commercial affairs of Mokena, eventually branching out into the grain business, becoming the builder and proprietor of the town's new grain elevator in 1884. After toiling at the general store for a while, he was at last able to buy the concern from his father-in-law along with the stock of goods. By the 1890s, John Hatch was maintaining his own general store on Front Street.
So when you talked about the new grain elevator, where was that located in town?
So the new grain elevator is still standing to this day. It is the big sort of barn-like structure that is just east of this building, Zap Taco House. If John Hatch was here today and he looked at his grain elevator, he would not recognize it because the original building, in the years after World War II, within a few years of the war ending, sort of toward its top was built out a little bit and sort of covered with a steel kind of cladding, we can maybe call it. So the building as it exists nowadays doesn't look anything like it did during Mr. Hatch's time, although underneath of all that stuff is that original building. And some of the original foundation is exposed too with thick slabs of stone.
Oh, wow.
So you can see that, the sharp-eyed Mokenian can find that stuff. So.
And where was his father-in-law's shop or store located?
So the McGovney and Sons store, it's kind of nebulous as to where exactly that was in town. I have seen a reference, however, to the McGovney store being housed in what was called the Ducker Building, which was a very historic landmark that stood, let's see here, on the south side of Front Street, couple doors east of its intersection with Mokena Street. So if anybody's listening remembers where Carter Garretsy's t-shirt shop was, C&J Silk Screening, the McGovney, or pardon me, the Ducker Building stood there. It burnt down years ago, though, back in the 1890s. So we know that for some of the time, at least, that the McGovney store was there. Maybe it moved around a little bit, but...
Okay. And this is another family that spent time and left Mokena to go to Missouri. Is there any connection to the McGovneys and the other families that have gone?
Yeah. So, for example, as we talked about in a past episode, the family of Elijah McGovney went to Missouri to try their luck around the same time that the Hatches did. And these were Nancy Hatch's relatives. Let's see, Elijah McGovney would have been Nancy Hatch's uncle. So her uncle, aunt, and cousins. Don't know if they went together or maybe one of them went first and wrote back to the other one saying, things are good, you should come down here. But yeah, there were a handful of local families from back then. We talked about the Hackers as well, that were going down to Missouri in this period after the Civil War. So something was enticing people down there.
And John Hatch was also the first village clerk.
That is correct. He was.
Obviously, there were probably a lot, with going through the process of incorporation and all that, that his name is probably on quite a few of those documents.
Oh, absolutely, right? It is, yeah.
Is there anything that kind of stands out, any significant documents that he might have written or been a part of that you know?
Something that's interesting, aside from, everything is in his handwriting. He took down the minutes from the board meetings.
How was his handwriting?
His handwriting is very good.
Okay.
For a man with some serious vision damage, his handwriting is impeccable. In going through some of his stuff, I've never had a problem reading anything. But he wrote up the first village ordinances. There's some pretty interesting stuff in those, like things like not having turkeys running loose in town, stuff like that.
Very cool. Oh, good. All right,
Absolutely.
Let's get back into it.
At some point towards the end of the 19th century, he further diversified his business portfolio and filled a long-wanted need in town by managing a hall for social gatherings such as dances, balls, and meetings in the village. It has long since disappeared in the pages of posterity when exactly this began, if he had any partners in this venture, or even where exactly in town the hall stood. What is known is that for some reason, John Hatch decided to have the building jacked up, hitched to teams of horses, and moved to a new location in winter 1901. Hatch Hall, as it was known around town, was set down south of the Rock Island tracks along Mokena Street, close to the grain elevator. A new life was on the horizon for the place. As soon as the dust settled after the move, Hatch moved his general store into the former hall. By the end of October 1901, new shelving was built and various tables moved into place to complete the building's transformation. Part of the store was used as Hatch's grain office, with their scales being installed as the store was coming together. It was the ultimate convenience for John Hatch, as all of his businesses were now under one roof. In what was deemed improvement fever by one Mokenian, cutting-edge gas-powered lights were installed too, 2 in the store and 1 outside. It was miraculously said that the business was as light as day inside, and one resident, prone to exaggeration at comic levels, said the glow of the one outside could be seen 2 miles outside town. Riding the wave of modernity, a gramophone was also set up in the store, and for a span of a week, concerts were held each night, which adoring Mokenians ate up. At the dawn of the 20th century, John Hatch was one of Mokena's most prominent businessmen, keeping not only the store, but also selling grain along with feed, coal, tile, and everything in between. That Hatch was one of the most liked and well-respected men in the village would not need repeating in his day. After throwing a dancing party in the hall for the community's youth in January 1900, Mokena's youngsters voted Mr. Hatch to be the best man in town. After another dance about a week later, a local news correspondent noted that he still cherished a place in his heart for the gaieties of young people. The old veteran was later known to dole out large lumps of maple sugar to youngsters visiting the store. Years later, it would be warmly reflected that he was a kind-hearted man who always went out of his way to do a favor to anybody. He was beloved by all who knew him. He always was of a cheerful disposition and made and retained friends readily. The book closed on John Hatch's long life on July 17, 1920, when his passing was rued on the front page of the News Bulletin, our community's erstwhile newspaper. Within months, Hatch's youngest son, Alfred, reconverted the building into its second iteration as a hall. The store was deconstructed, the interior completely remodeled, and the floor even freshly polished. On November 20th, 1920, the opening dance was held with a handsome turnout, 77 tickets having been sold. In this era, silent movies were also screened at Hatch Hall, which were noted to be just as good as can be seen in city theaters. They were aided by musical accompaniment on a Bauer piano that Alfred Hatch had installed. In January 1924, the old place was made over into the headquarters of the Hall Medicine Company, named not after the building, but rather its proprietor, the illustrious Don Carlos Hall. He, his wife Clara, and their children Don Carlos Jr., Walter, and Inez Hall moved into the place and also made it their home.
So July 17th, 1920, John Hatch passed away.
Yes.
Do you know of any significant events, other than what's mentioned, that took place here at Hatch Hall?
Nothing really too terribly out of the ordinary that I can think of. Just you name it in terms of social events, dances, get-togethers, meetings for the various organizations around town. In fact, listeners of the podcast will remember our episode we did on St. John's Church and the construction of the building of the current church that's in use now exactly 100 years ago. The day the church was opened for the first time, some of the congregation came here to Hatch Hall afterwards for like a get-together, a banquet. It's just one thing that popped into my head. Might have mentioned it in the podcast, can't remember, but yeah, just...
So it seemed to be doing pretty well. You talked about 77 tickets sold, but within 3 years, barely 3 years, his son Alfred has sold the property and gone. Do you know why? What happened there?
I don't know exactly why. I kind of hypothesize that it was because this wasn't Alfred Hatch's full-time job. He worked for a telephone company in Chicago for decades and decades and decades. So I'm kind of thinking, well, maybe his other work might have gotten in the way of it, but he did live in Mokena for a very long time. Everybody called him Joe. No one ever called him by his real name. Everybody called him Joe Hatch. And he lived to be, that must have been into his 90s. He passed away in Florida, St. Petersburg area in the 1980s.
Oh.
And was one of our village's World War I veterans, actually.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. They were newcomers in town, and rarely on the pages of Mokena's history has there appeared a more unique couple than Mr. and Mrs. Hall. A salesman of patent medicine, former member of the Wisconsin State Legislature, as well as a Shakespearean actor, Hall was affectionately called Colonel by those who knew him. The Halls were also known for their prowess at traveling by thumb, having crisscrossed the country hitchhiking. Favoring Western attire and sporting long whiskers and flowing white locks, Colonel Hall had one of Mokena's most unforgettable appearances. When Chicago was in the world spotlight for the 1933 Century of Progress, Colonel and Clara Hall were naturally a part of it, running the Days of 49 mining camp on the fairgrounds, harkening back to the days of the California Gold Rush. The Colonel served as the settlement's mayor, while Clara was the camp mother. By 1930, the Halls had packed up their household and relocated elsewhere within Mokena, and during the Great Depression and World War II years, the building served yet again as a public hall, hosting, among other organizations, the William Martin Post of the VFW. In April 1953, Hallie and David W. Noble, residents of Chicago and photo finishers by trade, took possession of Hatch Hall. They opened Noble's Variety Store here, which sold a little bit of everything. They also brought the old place into the post-war era, thoroughly modernizing it with indoor plumbing, fluorescent lights, and even a coral rose-color scheme to the interior. Like the halls previous to them, the Nobles made their home in the building. If the walls of Hatch Hall could talk, they'd tell of moments of whimsy, dances and masquerade balls, the business of fraternal meetings, and the coming and going of customers over the span of time. They'd reveal the personalities of some of the most interesting and unique people in our community's history. In the frenetic pace of today's world, it's easy to get lost in the here and now. Upon pausing and reflecting, it's just as easy to lose oneself in the history of this important, hallowed Mokena landmark.
Well, what a great history about this building that so many people in town now have come to know because of Zap Taco being here.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, Gino, tell us a little bit about, first tell us about yourself. How long have you been in Mokena?
I think, so I moved in 2019. I purchased the Chase Real Estate, which was Baker Interiors at the time when I purchased it.
That's correct, yeah.
And then we moved into the little house behind it at that time.
Okay.
So, yeah, so 2019.
And then
Wow.
when did you start the work here on Zap?
2020. So, and that was
Great timing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, while you were bringing it up and talking about the history is kind of what reminded me of like what I was going through during that whole time, because it just got approved right before COVID kind of shut down the entire world.
Yeah.
But it was, so that was, I would say, the most interesting thing is building a restaurant in a time when all the restaurants are closing and, the construction shortages, no one can leave their home. I would say, like, as far as history goes, like, that's going to be well known in history. And
For sure.
Oh, yeah.
it was a scary time, and the fact that we were doing it, and Jason and Todd, which, probably have more at stake, for actually running the restaurant in that time. But when we opened, or when they opened, it was great, and Mokena really, showed up and did a good job with that.
Awesome.
Did you already have the agreement with Jason and Todd
Yes.
before you bought the building?
Yeah. So that was all finalized before construction even got started. So we built it all out based on their, they worked with the architects and trying to design the building. And then, so we built it out, and Yeah, a lot of this was Todd. Todd is great with the colors, schemes, everything. Todd is really awesome. With the.
So what was, because we know, as Matt and I said before, everybody was coming through, looking in the windows before it was open, waiting for the grand opening. What kind of holdups did you have during that process?
Well, yeah, I think we all got COVID at one point in time during it, so that, held things. There was material delays because of, there was all kinds of shortages during that time. Also, the lumber prices were like triple, quadruple, whatever they were, they skyrocketed, and that affected pricing. So it was just a lot of COVID-related issues besides the whole world shutting down. So it was an interesting time.
And what was the history of this building kind of part of your thinking and planning and putting this together?
So when I bought the building, the plans were already done. Everything was already approved. But I think when they were designing the building, they wanted the exterior to look and stay pretty, time period to when it was built. And then the inside is really what changed and is definitely modernized compared to what it ever was.
Oh,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah, but the exterior, I think we did a good job with keeping it kind of original looking.
Yeah. I think so, yeah. It looks fantastic.
What did you guys find as you were kind of taking things apart, and what was it like getting into the walls of this place?
Yeah, so there wasn't I was hoping to find some really good items, but there really wasn't much. I think just because it's been remodeled so many times over the years, there was not too many really cool historical items that we were able to pull out of this. Where it really was nothing.
Can you tell a little bit what it was like walking through that front door before you guys started working?
Yeah, it was interesting. So the ceilings were 4 feet lower because they had built a false ceiling across the whole place, and it was divided about right where the bathrooms start. So the whole front then was the insurance office, and then the whole back was kind of a garage. There was where the cooler is now was a garage door that is where the fire extinguisher company used to use to recharge the fire extinguishers in their storage or whatever they did. But it was just completely different. So it was actually separated into 2 units, which then we combined it all into one. We had to pour the addition on the back slab to put the cooler, and then just building out a kitchen. And it was the first time I've done a lot of residential stuff, but commercial and then building a kitchen for the first time was a whole new learning experience for me too. And I think installing that hood was a delay in itself just for me trying to learn the whole process of it all.
Wow.
Yeah,
I don't know if Matt, you had any questions or anything you thought.
No, actually, you covered everything because I was just kind of curious about what the transformation of the interior was like. As we were saying before we started recording, my whole life, as far back as I can remember, it was always the Cottingham Insurance Agency, not to mention the fire extinguisher business. And, I never had any reason to come in here growing up or once I hit adulthood. So
it wasn't very welcoming either, I'd say.
Not really, no.
Big overgrown bushes and
yeah. So, but no, I was just kind of curious about that. But no, you guys touched upon everything I was wondering about already.
All right, so now I think what everybody in Mokena wants to know. Talk to us a little about the Paulie's building. Whoever doesn't know, Gino bought the Paulie's building.
Yes.
And so tell us what's going on.
So that building, it's sat vacant for I don't know how many years.
Many years.
10 years,
oh,
maybe.
At least.
Yeah. So it's been vacant for a while. We had to go through all the processes through the village to get that all passed. That all passed, and then we had to then finish the architectural drawings because at that point it was all just kind of conceptual. So then we had to actually dive in deep and get into the structures and get all the engineers out here. The engineers ended up staking the whole street and painting the whole street, And I remember I went to my office and I'm like, what the heck's going on? And then talking to other people in the city, and they're like, it's for Paulie's. And they're like, you paid for it. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So then I guess that's what's going on. Yeah, so all the architectural and structural engineering and all the engineering plans were done, and then once that was completed, now I had to go out and get all the bids, because then now I have to go in front of the TIF board. I submitted everything to the village as far as the architectural plans, so that's just starting, and that's going to go through the whole approval process with that. But yeah, I'm hoping to get started on that in the spring. And what the proposed plan is, first floor is going to be a restaurant. The whole first floor restaurant, and then the second floor we're going to put an addition on the west side, so that there's going to be 3 apartments upstairs.
Oh, cool.
Very nice.
So yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, it's been vacant for a while, and over the last 2 years we've joined the chamber with doing the windows on Front Street, and we've been, we put Jack Skellington, which with the push button, which I heard has kind of been a hit over the last 2 years. So
yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, that's exciting. It's exciting to think of another restaurant in downtown here and bringing more life. I mean, just now, so we've been in Mokena about 7 years, and 7 years ago you drive downtown on a Friday night and it doesn't look much different than Monday morning. It's probably busier on Monday morning because of the train station.
Yeah, exactly.
But Zap and all we're bringing tribes, and now hopefully with that new place, just bringing more life to down here to Front Street, which is awesome.
It's very cool. We're very excited.
Absolutely
for what's going to happen with Paulie's, or the old Wanamaker building, as I call it sometimes with people, but.
There's some awesome pictures, Matt, that we've seen of that property in back in the day.
Oh yeah, so much history there. Yeah, a lot of cool stuff.
We're really excited about that one, because that was, so I bought that building off of Luke Katara, who also owned this building too. So it was like a package deal, and I really wanted that one, but it was kind of like, well, he wanted to get rid of both of them, so in order to get that, I had to buy this one too. So it was that was kind of the deal that was made, and so
seemed to work out so far. Good,
yeah,
right?
So far so good.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, but,
how about a little bit about the Chase building that you bought first? What was that like? What was going on there?
Well, it was I thought it was pretty amazing from the moment I saw it, and then walking through it, and it had the fire in like 2002.
Yeah,
which
it was
then
bad.
Yeah, but it brought the whole building up to code and separated all the units, so each unit have their individual utilities and furnaces, and just really brought that building up to code. And so there wasn't too much to do to it, because it's going to need a roof here soon and some windows, but just small updates, not gutting the whole place and doing it like I've had to do with this building, and I'll have to do with Paulie's.
Yeah.
But
and you have your real estate office out of there, and then the Lashology next door,
who's my cousin Jenna Hinton, runs that place.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Cool.
Well, it's exciting that you seem to be single-handedly bringing life back to Front Street or to downtown Mokena. But it's exciting to hear about the old Paulie's building, or A's as Matt.
Yeah, as I always remember it.
So, and obviously what's going on with Zap is awesome, and look forward to talking to Jason a little bit and what they're doing with the business. But I know me and my family have thoroughly enjoyed it. We were here the opening weekend, and we've come to the comedy shows they're doing.
Yeah, I haven't been to a comedy show yet.
It's a lot of fun. I really love bringing that. People are bringing live entertainment to downtown. So thank you for doing that, Gino. Thank you for all you're doing to restore and keep these properties. And even if it's the shell, it's awesome to still see, because you get that image of what Mokena looked like a long time ago. So
it's great stuff. It really is.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Gino. Appreciate you taking the time with us, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you more about those other buildings.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Especially Paulie's. Maybe we can get a tour one day.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Gino.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gino.
It's really interesting to see the rich history that this property that began as Hatch Hall has in our community. To think about John Hatch being the first village clerk, and all the documents that were part of establishing our community and establishing us as a village, incorporating, are all written in his handwriting. And how cool to think that This building where we can sit and have tacos and margaritas now, years ago was being held for dances and meeting halls for places like the Mokena VFW. For years, this was used as a quiet office space, and today's Zap Taco has brought back the energy and activity more in line of the days of Hatch Hall. We want to thank Gino Picciola for taking time to sit down with us, and be sure to check out Zap Taco. It's on Mokena Street, right by the Mokena train station. I'll have a link to the blog, Matt's blog, from September 11th, 2020, with the article that this podcast is based on. So be sure to check that out. And be sure to take a look at our Facebook page for some of the photos from the article that are really interesting, that show the property over the years, as well as some photos of Mr. Hatch. So thank you for listening, and thank you for joining us on Mokena's Front Porch.